amongst all the people sitting there for the fourth place. Like, we select
Really?
like a fourth place.
That's a point of Shemini.
I've never heard of it.
Well, what do you do with,
He says, what do you
don't
do?
pour it out?
You pour it back in the bottle.
My father was there after that, it stayed on the table, so it was very good. Sure. The last thing that was.
First of all, Shmuel from us, we're all pushing the table.
Is the casket a better?
Okay, good morning, everybody. We are getting started on Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. Today's Erev Pesach, and let's see where we can get to. So just to review, yesterday we had a Mishnah in which, in the Reisha, the Mishnah talks about a woman who Nechasim felt to her while she was a Shomer Yevamos. So her husband had died, but she had not done Yibum yet with the Yovim. So we always like to kill Reuven, and we like to keep Shimon alive. So her husband Reuven died. She didn't do Yibum yet with Shimon, and her father now died, and she yarshin the Chassim. So the halach is both Beisham and Beisil agree that she has full control over those Nechasim, and she could sell them to whoever she wants, and her mekach is kayim. In the Sefer of the Mishnah discusses a different case where the woman had already died. The question is, what are we going to do with her nichsei maluk? So Beis Shammai says her family as well as his family have an equal connection to it, and therefore they'll split it. Unlike when she sold something that came to her when she was alive, in the first case, like in the first case of the Mishnah. And Basil says no, even nichsei maluk that she has remains in the domain of her family, and her family yarshins it. And the Gemara wanted to understand what is the difference between the Reisha and the Sefer. Now, the most obvious difference is the difference that the Mishnah itself makes, and that is she was alive when she sold the Nechasim, and she had died, and then we're discussing what to do with the nichsei maluk. However, that's only one of the four ways the Gemara understood the Mishnah. The other three ways, in fact, made no mention of the fact that in the first case she's alive, and in the second case she's no longer alive. As a matter of fact, the Mashkan of the Gemara even seems to lean towards a pshat that ignores this issue that the Mishnah decided to kill this woman between the Reisha and the Sefer. So I just want to quickly review the four answers, the four explanations, because it was a bit confusing yesterday. So Ula was the first parish, the first person who explained the Mishnah, and he said the Reisha, the reason why she has more control over her Nechasim, and therefore she could sell, has nothing to do with the fact that she's alive, but it's because she wasn't fully married to Reuven, she was only an Arusa to Reuven. So since she was only an Arusa to Reuven, therefore he has no connection, he has no control over her Nechasim. Now, a real Arusa, meaning her relationship with Reuben, she was only an Arusa, Sai Beis Shammai and Sai Beisil holds that any Nechasim she sells when she's only an Arusa is a good sale because it belongs to her. Beisil holds lechatchila she shouldn't sell anything while she's an Arusa, but everybody holds that her sale is good. However, once she's no longer an Arusa because her husband died, Reuben died, now she's only the Shomer Yevamos from an Arusa marriage. There, lechatchila, everybody agrees she has full control over her Nechasim and she can sell them. The second case, where Beis Shammai says Yachloiku, Beisil remains, that everything remains. Beisil says no matter what, sign the Reish, sign the Sefer, everything stays in the chazak of her family. Beis Shammai is the one who makes the distinction in the Sefer, and Ula says the Sefer speaking where she was not an Arusa to Reuven, she was an Asua to Reuven. Now, while she was an Asua to Reuven, she was fully in his control, and therefore even if she would have sold any Nechasim, he can go back and take them because they're Becheskas Habal. However, when she dies, the Gemara introduces the fact that once someone is no longer an Arusa or an Asur, she's only a Shemer Yevamos, she has the halacha of a Suffolk Arusa or a Suffolk Nesua. It doesn't mean we don't know if she's an Arusa, we don't know if she's an Asur. It doesn't mean something, the real sense of the word, that we don't know what it is. That's not what it is. We know exactly what she is. She's a Shemer Yevamos, but we give her the status as if there was a Suffolk, and therefore if she's a Suffolk Nusua, according to Beis Shammai, there's a connection to the husband and in the Chasam, and that's why Chachloiku. According to Basil, we still go according to the Chazak of her family, and we say that the Nechasim remain with her family. That was the first explanation that was offered up by Ula. And on that explanation, Rabbah asked a question. And Rabbah asked the question that we discussed earlier. The Mishnah is quite clear in the distinction between the first case and the second case. In the first case, she was alive. In the second case, she wasn't alive. So Zok Rabbah, in fact, that should be the discussion. And therefore, Rabbah says that's the difference. The difference is when she's alive, she for sure has control over the property. And since when she's alive, she for sure has control of the property, even though she fell, Kishi Nesua, we say belongs to her. And the lashon that Rabbah uses is Havali Vadai. If she's a Suffolk Nesua, she for sure has control over the Gufa Karka. The husband, it's only a Suffolk if he has control of the pairs. Because when she's a real Nesua, he does have control over the pairs. When she's a Suffolk Nesua, it's not clear that he has control over the pairs. And therefore, in the Reisha, when she's alive and she's holding on to the actual property, she's in control. We say in Suffolk Vadai, and in the Sefer, it's speaking where she already died. So now there's no one who's a muhsik in the property. The question is, who is the Yerush? Is the Yerush her family, or is the Yerush her husband's family? And therefore, Beis Shammai holds it's the Suffolk. It still holds it's still more connected to her family than it is to the husband's family, and therefore it remains with the family of the wife. And then the Gemara got into a little discussion here about whether or not Beis Shammai holds ein Suffolk moitzi midivadai. The Gemara, in fact, remained that Beis Shammai does say ein Suffolk moitzi midivadai, but there's also a concept of kol ha'oimid ligvois kagavidami. If someone has a star on the chosam, it's as if it's in his possession. Okay, that was the second answer. So the first answer was it depended if she was an almana of an arusa marriage or an almana from an asua marriage, which is Ula. Rabbah's territory was it depends if she's alive or dead. It's for sure she's an almana from an asua marriage, but if she's alive, she has more of a koyach in the karka, therefore it's completely in her domain. But once she dies, it becomes more of a suffix according to Beis Shammai, and therefore his family, the Baal's family, gets half of the nechasim. That was the second shot. The third shot was Abaye's shot. And Abaye said, let's see if I can find it. Abaye said, the difference is in the ratio, and I'm at the bottom line of Daf Amud Chesem Abayis. The ratio is speaking when the nechasim fell to her when she was a Shemeres Yobin. So when did her father die? When did she yarshin his properties? When she was no longer married to her first husband. And she was not married yet to her second husband either. She was in between. So there, we consider the nechasim to be hers completely. But Seifa is speaking where her father had already died and her husband was still alive. So at that point, her husband was already yarshining it because he was the real Baal, and that's why it according to Beis Shammai, even though Reuben died after he yarshined it, nevertheless it remains in the suffix, and therefore it's a between her family and his family. While Basil holds it's always in the chazaka of her family. That was the third pshat. And then the final pshat is the pshat that the Gemara liked the best, is Rabbah's pshat. Rabbah learns the ratio where she has full control of speaking where there's only a zika. But in the Sefer, where he has some control of speaking where he made mimer on top of that. So if the other made mimer, now he has a greater kinyan in her. And Rabbah learns that according to Beis Shammai, mimer makes her into a Suffolk Nesua, and that's why he has access to 50% of the properties. And the Gemara liked Rabbah's pshat the best to say that we were referring to properties that fell to them when he was alive, because it says at the end of our Mishnah, it says Nechasim hanachnasim v'yotzim ima. The discussion between Beis Shammai and Basil are on the properties that came in with her to the marriage and then left with her. If they came in with her to the marriage, then she must have yarshin them. Her father must have died while she was still married to Reuben. So that sort of gives support to Rabbah that regardless, we're speaking to Nechasim that fell while she was still married to Reuben, and the whole question over here is whether or not mimer was made. Okay, that takes us to the end of the difficult portion of the Gemara, and now we're going to get into the easy portion of the Gemara. the Gemara, even though the Gemara ended off with the words Vesula Midi, we're not discussing this again. The very first thing I did after that is discuss it again. But the Mishnah says Vesula, the Gemara says Vesula Midi. Anyway, Kansa, the Mishnah says once a man does Yibum on a woman, she is now considered fully his wife. In what respect is the Mishnah saying that she becomes fully his wife? To teach you, it tells you two things. A is now his relationship with her is like a regular marriage. So the way he would break his relationship with her, if he wanted to, was to give her a get. Chalitza will no longer be effective. The other halach is machsira. He can take her back. You might think that there's still an isser eshesach upon her. We waived it so he could do yibum, but if he divorces her, now the original isser of eshesach comes back. Kamash no. Once he does yibum, she's like his wife, and she would have the full halachas of his wife, and his wife he would be able to divorce and take her back, of course, provided that he was not a kohen. Why do I need the Tana to tell me that he can divorce his regular wife with a get? Because I might have thought otherwise. And this is Chazar as well. We learned this already. It says, he should take her as a wife and he should do yibum. It almost sounds that even once he's already taken her as a wife, there's still of a yibum. She still has the status of a yavam. You might have thought that the V'yibna says that she still has a status of a Yevama, even though you took her already, you made Yibam, and therefore the Chalitzin begetloi. You might have thought that in order to eliminate your relationship, to sever your relationship with her, you would still need Chalitza, because the Torah still calls her a Yevama, even after you've already taken her. Kamash Malon, that a get is enough, and you don't need any more chalitza, because once Yibum was done, that zika is over with.
It should be the other way around. It should really be the lokchaloi, the lokcha liyavma, v'yiloi leisha. Because the last thing that she's going to be is she's going to be a full-fledged wife. Yibma is the idea that you're going to have children through her to be mamed her,
So you're also commenting that the Yibma is a little bit out of place.
Yeah.
And so you're masking that the Gemara wants to learn into it. So the Gemara wanted to learn into it, and maybe that means she's still a Yivama.
Here.
Right? The Lamaisa will still need to know what the Yibma tells us, because we're saying Kabash will know. So then why is it now that the Yibma is there and it doesn't make sense, and we can't say that it teaches you that you still need Chalitza, so what does it teach you?
I think what Vayibla simply means is Vayibla to have children, to be mamed your brothers.
I hear. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. We'll see what the Gemara
The
says.
last thing that he has, the highest status that a woman can have is a wife. That's meaning that's the, well, obviously besides that, but the highest status within what we're talking about.
I hear. Okay, is that the Gemara? Machsira, Pshita. Once it's his wife, of course he can take her back if he divorces her. So that's the Gemara. No, so Kedai Techamina. Mitzvah di Rami Rachman ala Abda. The mitzvah that the Rebbeinu Shalom put on her, that the Torah put on her, that's the Yibim, she's done already. So therefore, now that the mitzvah is not there anymore, Hash to take them alay be Israel Eshizach. Kamash Malon that not. Maybe in fact, once he divorces her, he can't take her back. Once he's taken her, it's Ishtar l'chol davar. So Rashi tells us that the Gemara on Daf Ches told us what the V'yibim is used for. So there were different Tanaim who had different approaches as to what they use V'yibim for. One learned that V'yibim tells you that it's even Bal Karcha. That was one pshat that we had. And we had another pshat, according to Rabbi, Rashi tells us to tell you that the tzaras of the arayis are also osir, only b'mokam yibum, but the tzara of an herb is not osir shaloi b'mokam yibum. So for instance, if your daughter married Moshe Pipik, who's not related to you, and Moshe Pipik happens to have another wife, then the halach is if Moshe Pipik divorces that other wife, you're allowed to marry her. Because it's a tzaras erva, but it's not b'mokam yibum. There's no chiv yibum over there. Okay, let's see the Mishnah, let's see the Gemara Vayta. She takes subasa. The Mishnah says that the only difference between a regular marriage and a yibum is that her ksuba is only min harishon, meaning the only assets that are meshubah to the ksuba are the assets of the deceased, not the assets of the person who did the yibum. My timer, because Isha hiknu loy min hashamayim. He didn't have to make his own marriage and therefore come up with his own liabilities. Rather, he just stepped into his brother's shoes, and the nechasim that are still there that belong to his brother are what's going to guarantee that ksuba. He doesn't have to come up with his own items. The less laminarishan, but if there were no assets at all from the deceased, then takinu la misheni is a takana that he will have to be mishabed his personal assets to pay off the tshuva. Why? We don't want it to be easy for him to get rid of her. We want him to know that it's going to cost him a lot of money if he wants to divorce her, and therefore we're masakin minasheni if there's not minarishon. But if there is minarishon, if there's assets from the rishon, then the only ksuba she could claim would be from the rishon. Okay, mitzvah begadol yabim. We learned this mishnah already before, daf Daled, but we're going to learn it again, and it's quite easy. Mitzvah begadol yabim. The mitzvah is the oldest brother to do the evil. At this point, we're going to assume it means not the oldest one available, but the oldest, period. What if he didn't want? They go down the line to offer this opportunity to all of the brothers.
It doesn't say that they go down the line. It just says al kol ha'achim. How do we know that it goes down the line?
We'll see. There's going to be a brisa that says that. So that's a good point. Now, loy ratzu, if nobody else wanted, chayzun eitel gadol, they go back to the oldest. Well, I remember they tell them, olacha mitzvah. L'maisa, the mitzvah is upon you, and therefore, oy chaloitz oyiben. Pick your choice, but you have to do one of them. Tala b'katan achiyako. What if he said, listen, I'm not prepared to do yibum, but there's a younger brother here who's a katan. He's underage. He can't do yibum yet because a katan cannot do yibum. Let's wait until he gets older, and then he'll do yibum because I'm not willing to do yibum. So to Gemara, or maybe he was the oldest one available who they approached, but there's someone even older than him who happens to be on a business trip, and he says, "Why don't you wait for this gadol to come back?" Oy cheresh, oy shoita, or he says, "Let this brother who's a cheresh or a shoita do it." So he says, "Let's give it to my older brother, not to me, who's either away now, wait till he comes back, or he's a cheresh, or he's a shoita." Ain't shayman loy. You don't listen to him. We tell him, Alecha mitzvah, upon you is the mitzvah, oy chaloitz oy. So the Gemara is going to give details on how this works. Yes.
So in the beginning, when you say he didn't want, is it saying that he didn't want to do chalitza either? Or he just didn't want to do yibum?
That's a beautiful question. That's exactly what the Gemara is going to be discussing. It's exactly what the Gemara is going to be discussing. What exactly didn't he want to do? So let's see the Gemara. Zog to Gemara, Itmar, bias katan v'chalitzas gadol. What if we have a choice? Either a younger brother is going to do the yibum. If the oldest brother does it, he's only willing to do chalitza. What should we do? One holds we're better off waiting and let the katan to do it. No, not waiting. We're better off letting the younger brother do the yibum. The mitzvah is that the oldest brother let him do the chalitza. Man damar bias kat nadifa. It's because the mitzvah be yibum. The main mitzvah is to do yibum. So if we could find a brother that's going to do yibum, even though it's not the oldest, that's the best option. Man damar chalitzas gadol adifa. It's because v'makam gadol bias kat lav klumi. The emphasis is on the oldest brother, and we'll see. You know that from Sukkim by Yabachar. So therefore, better the older brother should do chalitza rather than have a younger brother do yibum.
The whole purpose is negated. It's almost like that Mom Baba was afraid to say his name.
No, but we actually did learn that chalitza does make a tikkun for the neshama. We learned that. We learned that akadekach, that if a woman knows her husband's dying and she doesn't want to be subject to yibum, she cannot demand a get. He could say, "No, I bedaf the one that my brother should do chalitza when I die because there's a tikkun for the neshama there." So Zakir Tanan we learned. Loy rata.
You have the tikkun for the neshama and you have the kibbutz.
Okay. So that's the shayla, but there's also mitzvah gadol. So Tana we learned. So now we're getting into Dovi shayla. Tana we learned. Loy ratza, if the oldest didn't want, machzirin al kol ha'ach. You give it the opportunity to all the other brothers. My love, loy ratza liyabim elalachleitz. So at this point, the Gemara is going to say that the Mishnah means the oldest didn't want to do Yibam, but he would have been willing to do Chalitza. Nevertheless, v'katani mahachan etzel achan. Yet it says you still offer it to the other brothers. So you see clearly that we'd rather a Yibam than a Chalitza. Shema mina bias katan adifa. Zakmar loy. That's not trying in the Mishnah. What our Mishnah means is really, if the oldest brother didn't want to do Yibam or only Chalitza, so you let him do the Chalitza. Here he didn't want to do Chalitza either. He didn't want to do anything. The kavasa kabaya achin. So therefore, you'll have to understand the Mishnah that when we approach the achin, they also refused. Loy rotu means loy lachletz v'loy liyabim. Nobody wanted to do anything at all. So, Frank Gemara, if nobody wanted to do anything at all, when they get to the last brother, they have to then go back to the first and force the first brother. Am I choshim eitzal agogel? Why are you matriach bezdin to go back and find the first guy who they approached and get him, force him to do yibum or chalitza? The mechafia to force him, lechafia lidu. Let them just force the last guy. Let them just force the last guy. And Rashi tells us very, very beautifully.
Let them just force the first guy. Forget it, kol ha'achin. Right in the beginning. If you're telling me that lachleitz is better, or also something.
Well, here we're talking about where the first brother didn't want to do either.
Who cares? Force him.
I hear vice
There's another option for the brothers.
We see that we see that chalitza, you're telling me, is some kind of tickle from the mekuvolim. So let's do it.
I guess we see from here that since the other brothers can do it, if the oldest one refuses, you're supposed to offer to the second one.
No, so we see that this mekubal thing is not really so kohagen.
Why is that?
Because we see that we want the brothers to do evil.
No, here we want the brothers to do. Now we're learning that if the first brother didn't want to do Yibam or Chalitza, so we went to the next brother and we asked him to do Yibam or Chalitza. We wanted either one of the brothers to do Chalitza here.
Right, but
and no one even wanted to do Chalitza.
But if we're ready to force him, if we're ready to force the last one, then force the first one in the beginning, because you're telling me that Chalitza has.
Oh, so vice the choice that you don't force if one of the brothers are asking.
What do you mean if one of the brothers are masking? Oh, you mean
It's a
you'd
chance.
rather have a Chalitza that's not with force
Then with force.
than a Chalitza
That's
with
right.
force.
That's right. So let's see how the Gemara, how Rashi explains the question. Why do you go? Why are you matriach bezin to go back to force the first fellow to do chalitza? Why don't would you have the last guy? Let him force the last guy. Why are you giving the bezin a runaround for? If you're going to learn that they just didn't want to do yibam, but they were willing to do chalitza, then I understand why they go back to the oldest brother. Since everybody's willing to do chalitza, but we're looking for a yibam, then we say iyu kadim. Let him go to the yibam. If you're saying nobody even wants to do chalitza, why would you go back to the first one? Pshita l'machafia l'mechletz. Why would they go back to the gadol? It makes more sense. It makes more. Let's go back. Why should you go back to the first guy to force him? They're there anyway by the last guy. Let them just force this youngest brother who they approached to do the chalitza. Don't be matriach the bezdin to go back. I'm sorry?
Why did they go to the first guy first?
They went to the first guy first. They went to him first.
Why did they go to him first? There was an Indian for him to do it more than.
Correct.
So that's why we're going to force it, whatever that reason was.
Oh, that's a very, very good question. Zok to Gemara, Kiva the mitzvah alei the day Ramya, since there was a reason for him to do it first, exactly like what he says, the day Chayfinan, that's why we force it. Okay, so we don't have a raya yet at this point, whether or not you're better off doing Yibam with a younger brother or Chalitza on the older brother. So it's not looking at Brisa. If someone said, let the younger brother do it, except he's not bar mitzvah yet, ain't showing in law, you don't wait for it. Frank Gemara, the bias katna difa, if you hold that you're better off allowing a younger brother to do Yibam rather than the older brother doing Chalitza, am I in showing in law? Why don't you let us push it off because we'll have the opportunity for a yibum to be done, and we won't have to settle for a chalitza. Nintar dilma gadol umiyab. Let's wait for the younger brother. Why does the Mishnah say you don't wait? In fact, that's not a kasha because what if the oldest brother is in Medina Siyam and someone should just let's wait for him to come back? Again, ain't Shemaloi. Why not? Amai ninter dilma osi v'yavim umiyabim. Maybe he'll come back and do it. Ella kol shu mitzvah loy machine. The raya from this Mishnah is nothing more than you don't wait. We deal with this right now. We don't say let's wait and see what might occur. We want to find someone to do yibum or chalitza right now, and therefore we don't wait. So the reason why it says tell the not shakli and shemaloi, it's not because there's no mila in the cotton. About it, there is a mila in a younger brother doing yibum or with older brother doing chalitza. But if we have to wait, then that's not acceptable. We want to get this woman her freedom immediately.
What about waiting?
I'm sorry?
What about waiting?
It seems like you don't wait at all.
You don't wait like a day?
I'm not sure what the limit
Do
is.
it as soon as possible. But either way, it's not a zikr anyway. It's something anyway.
They don't want to do it.
You don't wanna do
That's
it.
right.
That's why you don't wait. Because if you knew for sure, then you would wait.
So Zakta Gemara is the Amri. There are those who say the bia, when it comes to bia, kul amalai pligi the bia is cotton. Everybody holds that it's pashut that you're better off for a cotton to do yibum rather than have an older brother do chalitza. Keep peligi the chalitza's cotton. The machlokes is by chalitza's cotton. V'hachi itmar. And this is what the Gemara means to say. Chalitza's cotton, the chalitza's gadol. If you had a choice whether the oldest brother to do chalitza or a younger brother, pligi bar Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Chad amar chalitza's gadol adifa. The chad amar kiadadi ninu. One man holds chalitza is still best to be done by the older brother, and the other man says it doesn't make a difference. Man amar chalitza's gadol adifa da mitzvah begadol. The idach and the other man holds ki amar mitzvah begadol in yibum. The pasuk that says Haya Bechor is referring to yibum. If it's a question of who does yibum, it's best off that the oldest brother should do yibum. Avalin chalitza, once we're doing chalitza, then kadadin it doesn't matter. Tanan we learned loy ratzu chayzun etzel gadol. If nobody wanted to do the yibum, only the chalitza, you go back to the oldest. My love, the same half meaning as we had on Amud Aleph, which is Duvi Shaila really. Loy ratzu means layabim elalachlot. The Mishnah means that each of the brothers didn't want to do yibum, but each of the brothers would have been willing to do chalitza. Vikatani, and it still says chayzun etzel gadol. You see that even though each brother is masked to do the chalitza, we would rather the oldest brother do the chalitza. So from the Mishnah, you would see that we prefer that the chalitza should be done by the oldest. That's not what the Mishnah means. Rather, leiratu is lo lachlet for lo liyabim. Neither of the brothers wanted to do either yibum or chalitza. Because say gabi gadol lo irata lo lachlet for lo liyabim. Nobody wanted to do chalitza yibum. If that's the case, alamai chayzun etzel gadol lemechafia. Why do we go back to the oldest one to force him? The same kasha we asked on Amud Aleph. The chafayu lididhu. Force the last brother and don't be matriach the best to go back to the first brother. Zok Gemara, even the mitzvah alei didei ramya lididei chayfina. Since the first mitzvah is on him, like Mati said, you go back and you force him. Tashma, ta'oba gadol ad sheyavai memedina sayam. What if a younger brother said, wait for the oldest brother until he gets back from out of town? Ain't shayim you don't listen to him. V'isal kadai the chalitzas gadol adifa. If you hold, you're always better off even doing the chalitza with the oldest brother. Amai ain't shayim loy. Why don't you wait? Why don't we wait for the older brother to get back from Medina Sayam and he'll do chalitza then? According to your svara, that the reason why we're waiting because it's better. What about the cotton achiyagdal in Shaimalai? Amai ninter dilma gadol umayabim. Why don't we wait for the cotton? Maybe the cotton will do yibum. It's even better. Ella, kol shu mitzvah l'shein. It goes down to the bottom line is we want to free this woman as quickly as possible. We don't wait at all for the mitzvah, and therefore, from the resources of the people available now, that's who you do it from. There's no raya from the fact that we don't wait for the older brother to come back. That it's because it doesn't matter to do it with the older brother. If the older brother was here, Avada, it's better to do it with the older brother. The only reason why the Mishnah is telling us not to wait for the older brother is because he's not here right now. It's not awesome. Mitzvahs yibum kodemes lemitzvahs chalitza. It's better to do yibum than chalitza, right? We had a machlokes. We had another time that held that it's better to do chalitza. So here, the Mishnah says it's better to do yibum rather than do chalitza. Originally, when people did yibum, they did it l'shem mitzvah. That's when it was better to do yibum. But achshav nowadays, the kavanah isn't pure. Therefore, they said mitzvahs chalitza kodemes lemitzvahs yibum. Mitzvahs chalitza is your first choice before yibum. Omar Rav said, "Ain't kaifin." You don't force. It's a big machlokes Rashi and Tosfos here, but Rashi learns you don't force him to do chalitza. Meaning, if he wanted to do yibum, you would let him do yibum. And Rashi has a very important point that he makes at the very top. Rashi, Omar Rav ain't kaifin the nichel tervayu liyibumi. If they are both interested in making yibum, both the yavim and almana, then ain't kaifin oisel lachlos. And why would you think that you forced them to do chalitza, even though they prefer yibum? Because the name we might say lav lemitzvah chavnei upaga beiser eshesach. We have to be careful not to let him do yibum, even though they both want, because if he's not doing it with the right kavanah, it could lead to the iser eshesach. Ella, we don't say that. Rather, iboy miyavim, we do allow him to do yibum. Umiyuzak Rashi, very important point. If it says that you don't force him to do chalitza, well, what if he wants to do yibum and she doesn't? What do you do then? So normally we don't do yibum fil bakarcha. But Rashi is telling us here, don't worry, women. If you don't want to marry this guy because he's a menovel mukashkin, you don't have to worry. If he wanted to do yibum, the amra loy beina, and she says I don't want, but amra devarm the karam, and she has a decent reason why she doesn't want to be married to him. So then, if we could fool him, and to tell him, give her chalitza, she'll pay you a fortune to give her chalitza. So we'll fool him, we'll let him do the chalitza, and they'll say, sorry, you don't get any money. But if he's not going to be willing, and he only wants to do yibum, he refuses to do chalitza, then kafinin will even force him to do chalitza. And she's protesting, I don't want to be married to this ugly guy. You don't plug up her tightness. In other words, you accept her argument, and you in fact force the Yavim to do chalitza. And Rashi says, don't say it's dafka if he's a mukashkin, so it's really repulsive for her to be married to him. Any excuse that she would give would be acceptable. And Rashi goes on to say, even if the Yavim was a bursi, so he dealt with leather, which made him smell, so he always had a bad smell, even such an excuse would be accepted, even though her first husband did the same thing. So it's still acceptable. So Rashi is telling us that don't read into Rav and Kaifin Oisai. That it means you never force him. It means you don't force him to do chalitza if they both were in agreement to do yibum. But of course, if she didn't want, you will be Kaifin Oisai. That's why Tosfos doesn't like Rashi's shot, because Tosfos doesn't like Rashi's chalukim. So Tosfos learns that Kaifin Oisai means you don't Kaifin Oisai to do yibum, according to the first shot in the Gemara that yibum is better. When they came to Rav, he used to always say, "Ibayis chalitz." If you want to do chalitza, by all means, ibayis yibam. If you want to do yibam, v'didach talar rachmana. It's up to you, because that's what the Torah says. It's up to what the yabam wants to do. Ham chavetz ibay chalitz ibay yibam. Rabbi Yehuda also holds ein kaifin. And again, according to Rashi, means you don't force chalitza. You let him do yibam if he wants. He's asking Rabbi Yehuda Begita the chalitza. Rabbi Yehuda was misakin by a get of a chalitza. And he doesn't have correct. We're gonna go now into a whole machlokes is if not having to ask for a mitzvah is going to cause a problem or not. Because if it causes a problem, you shouldn't be able to let him. They obviously learned that not having to ask for a mitzvah is not a problem. It's still a good yibum. So we're going to see it in a second. He's asking me to begin the chalitza. Eich ploinis, bach ploinis, akrivas, yos ploini, yevama, kadmona levedina. This woman brought her brother-in-law to the Bezdin. And we proved that he's in fact the brother of the deceased, and therefore there's a chiyuv for him to do yibam or chalitza. And we tell him, Yitzavis liyabe yabem. Viloi itlach reglayich. If you don't want to do Yibam, stick out your foot, the yamina, your right foot. The itlala ragla the yamina, and then he'll stick out his right foot. The sharis sinei mal ragloy, and she'll take off his shoe from his foot. The yarak bad poi, and she will spit in front of him on the floor. Roika the bischazil of edina. It has to be saliva that Bezin could see it. Al ara on the floor. So they have to be able to see it. If it's a discreet little sprinkle, it doesn't count. It has to be a good stickle, right?
Khalitsa's shoe is for him.
That's what's called a chalitza.
Khalitsa's shoe is for him.
That's right. He puts it on and then she takes it off him. That's right. Reb Chia bar Avia, Messiah ba Mishmei Reb Yehuda, and Reb Chia bar Avia adds to it Bakriinu, and then they all say loud Madachsiv b'Sefer Araisa de Moshe, which is what it says in the Torah. It says lechafasti lekachta. They actually read the parsha in the Torah. Okay, so to Gemara, Ishtu Madinu. What does it mean, Ishtu Madinu? We've confirmed that this gentleman is the brother of the deceased. They need Adam that testify that this is a brother. It's just a verification, but it doesn't necessarily mean with a proper Adam. You don't need to bring two Adam to testify. Anybody can tell us and verify that this fellow, in fact, is the brother.
Is there a minor of a brother that is from both the mother and the father?
I don't think so. It's only about the father. That's right.
Even if you had, if the Gadol was only paternal brother and the cousin was brother from the mother and the father.
I don't think it would make a difference. In the beginning, when people were L'Shem Shamayim, then mitzvahs yibum kedemes l'mitzvahs chalitza. V'achshav she'em mischaven L'Shem mitzvah, armu mitzvahs chalitza kedemes l'mitzvahs yibum. Amar Rami Bacham Rabbi Yitzchak. Chazru loimer. Then they changed. They said mitzvahs yibum kedemes l'mitzvahs chalitza. Then they said the mitzvahs yibum comes first. Amalei Rav Nachman Yitzchak. Ach Sherdori. Are you telling me that people got better? That doesn't make sense to say. People don't get better. Rashi says, "Bitmiya b'chiniskashtra doris." You find that doris get better. It hasn't happened. So why would we say that now you do yibum? So tomorrow rather may kara sabri like Abishol. Originally held like Abishol, who held that if you don't do L'Shem Shamayim, it'll be a big problem. Therefore, you're better off doing chalitza. Well, besides sabri like Rabbanon, that even if you didn't do L'Shem Shamayim, it's still a mitzvah of evil. It's not the time we learn. Abishol Omer, Akani says L'Shem Noi. You married a woman, you did yibum because she was beautiful. L'Shem Isus, L'Shem Dover Acher. For any other reason other than the mitzvah of Yibam itself, the Karmani Be'enai. And Abishol wants to say, At Kedei Kach, that if you're not Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibam, then it would be an Isser Eishasach, Midoraisa, which is a Chiv Chorus, and I would say that Liyos Havlad Mamzer, the child would even be a Mamzer. I'm sorry?
What if he wants to do it because of both reasons?
Yeah. You can always have in mind, she's beautiful, but I'll do it out the mitzvah. It's so hard to say I'm doing it out the mitzvah.
I hear, but could be over there wouldn't be a problem. Could be over there wouldn't be a problem. I don't know.
When will it be? Like, I'm the dafka not doing mitzvah.
Yeah, I guess so.
How do you know it's Kavanah?
He doesn't care. He doesn't care about it. Yeah. Okay, let's see. So let's see the Gemara. Mantana lahal de Tanu Rabban. Who is the author of the following brayso that we're going to quote? It says Yevama Yave Aleh mitzvah. Yevama is bala is a mitzvah. Shebetchila Haisa Alav b'chal heter. Before his brother married this woman, she was a regular woman who he could have married. Nesra, once Shimon's brother Reuben married this woman, now this woman is also to him because it's Eishasach. When Reuben dies without children, because of a hutra, now she becomes mutter again. So Yochel taxer letera rishon. You might think that she goes back to her hetera rishon, meaning he has a choice whether he wants to marry her or not. She's like any woman in the shuk. Any woman in the shuk, you're not mechuyev to marry her, but you're allowed to marry her. Talmud loymer yavama yava mitzvah. No, there's a mitzvah bedavka yes to marry her because now she's a yavam. Man Tana, who's the Tana? Amr B'Zbadimai. It's going to be Abishol. It's going to be Abishol. And this is how he's going to learn. Yevama Yavli Aleh mitzvah. Shebetchila Haisa Allah b'chal het. Originally, Originally, she was mutter to him before she was married to Reuven. She was a regular stranger, and she's mutter. And therefore, Ratza L'Shem Noi Kainta, Ratza L'Shem Ishas Kainta. He's allowed to marry her for any reason he wants when she's a free agent before she was ever married to Reuven, his brother. But Nesra, once Reuven, his brother, married this woman, she's going to be Aser, Nesra. And then once Reuven dies, Chazer B'Hutra, Yachzor Lachzer L'Teira Rishain, you might have thought that she goes back to her original heter, Talmud Leimer, Yevamos Yavayela Limitzvah. If you noticed earlier, it said mitzvah. It's a mitzvah of him to make evil. Here it says limitzvah. Limitzvah means you're only allowed to marry her l'shem mitzvah and not l'shem anything else. So that's how Abishol would learn. So Rav Amar Afilu Tema Rabbanon. You could even say that this last mission of limitzvah is going according to Rabbanon. And this is how you could learn. Yevamos Yavayela is mitzvah, not limitzvah. So if you learn mitzvah, it means Yevamos Yavayela. It's not optional if you should marry her or not. You're mechuyev to marry her. If it's a mitzvah, then the limit is you're only allowed to do yibum if you have kavanah purely for the mitzvah. So betchila, haisa, the chalat heter, ratza kainta, ratza in kainta, nesra. Once she gets married to Reuven, now she's also to Shimon. Chazra b'hutra, if Reuven dies, she becomes mutter. Yachal takser latera rishon. You might think she goes back to the original status that she was before she ever married Reuven, and therefore ratza kainta, ratza in kainta. Why would you have such a havamina that Ratza in Kainza? Ratza in Kainza, ha'agida bei. She has a zika to him. Why would I think without the pasuk of Yevamos Yavayela that she goes free? Rather, this is how you should learn the Bryce. Ratza Kainza, Ratza Chaylitzla. You have a choice between doing Yivam or Chalitza. Hamid Loimer Yevamos Yavayela mitzvah. You're better off doing the mitzvah of Yibam rather than the mitzvah of Chalitza. So this indicates from the Mishnah that the Brisa is saying that the mitzvah is ikar to do Yibam. Ema Reisha or Ema Sefa. It says this Brisa that discussed this relationship with you and the woman and what the status was before, what the status after, actually discusses another mitzvah which is relevant to us, the mitzvah of eating matzah. It says matzahs te'achel b'makim kadosh, and this is talking about the carbon mincha that is made out of flour. So the shirayim are eaten b'makim kadosh. The shirayim of the mincha are eaten not chametit but matzahs. Zok Gemara, matzah te'achel b'makim kadosh, mitzvah. That's a mitzvah. Why? So betchila originally before you ever made this flour into hektish. The flour that was being used for the mincha was regular chulin flour. You could do anything you want. Nesra, once you were makdish this flour and you dedicated it for the carbon mincha, it became osher to you. You're not allowed to use it at all because you're not allowed to eat the shiyari hamincha before the haktar of the kaimitz. After the haktar of the kaimitz, v'chazer v'hutra. So yachal takser leteira rishain. You might thought that it goes back to its original status of heter. Talmud Leimer Matza te'achal b'makom kadosh mitzvah. So there's two ways that you can learn this, right? Either you could learn it Matza b'makom kadosh mitzvah. It's not optional to eat it. There's bedafka mitzvah to eat it, right? There's a mitzvah to eat shirai, but you can't learn that it means lim mitzvah because nobody's going to say that you're not allowed to eat kachim shalol l'shem shemayim. So therefore, bishtam Rava, if you're going to learn like Rava, the Amar Hamani Rabbanan, that learns that this Bryce is going according to the Rabbanan, and it's just telling you that there's a mitzvah to do it, but not that you have to do it l'shem the mitzvah of Yibam. Hachi kamar matzah tayachal b'makom kadosh mitzvah shebetchila haisa lav b'chal heter. Originally, before you were makdish this wheat, it was heter ratza eichla ratza eina eichla. You had the option to eat it or not. Then Nesra, once you were makdish, it became aser. And you have the option if you want to eat the shir or not. Kamash Malon, not. But frankly, more how could you suggest that you have the option not to eat the shiori mincha? This is a pasuk that's referring to carbon chatas, and it tells us that the kohanim have to eat the shiraim. It's integral to the carbon for the shiraim to be eaten because malamet kohanim oichlin who buy them as kaprim. So of course the shirai mincha has to be eaten, no different than the meat of the chatas has to be eaten in order to affect the full kapara of the carbon. So of course you have to eat it. Ella, what it means is rata hu oichla, rata koin acha oichla. If he wants, he can eat this mincha. The mincha has to get eaten, but who said he has to eat it? Maybe another kohen can eat it. Tabeloimer matas teachel b'makom kadosh mitzvah. There's a mitzvah that this kohen who's bringing the mincha should eat the shirayim. So that makes perfect sense. That we're learning from the matzah ta'achel. We're learning something similar to how we learned by Yibam, that it was optional until now, and now it's mandatory. But according to Rabbi Dimai, who learns that this brayso is going according to Abba Shol, and it means a limit. You have to eat it. Dafka l'shem mitzvah, otherwise it's a problem. How are you going to learn over here? How are you going to learn over here? So Rashi specifically says right over here, my tregavnika, the komayit tana, the komayit tana. It says yachal taxel tera rishon tamad loimer deloy v'hal lekel meimar. You can't say taxel tera rishon ratcha l'shem mitzvah eichla ratcha shaloi l'shem mitzvah eichla tamad loimer deloy. Why? Because the hakol kama the boy lechle. When you're eating kachim, even if he's eating it not l'shem shemayim, it's still a good achila. It's not like over there that if you're doing the yibum shaloi l'shem mitzvah, Abba Shol said you're pagei be'erva. That's something you could say in the case of yibum, but you can't say that in the case of kachim because any way you eat it, it's going to be okay. So Zaktimar my trey gavni ika. What is the explanation of the difference in the two ways you could do it? By Yibam, the two ways you could do it is you can eat it l'shem shemayim or not. What are the two ways you could do? You can eat the shiur mincha here. That one is good, the one is not good. The Torah is saying l'mitzvah, you have to only eat it the right way. If you want to say that a regular food you can eat it l'tei oven, or you can eat it when you're full. So to Gemara, but that wouldn't be true because achila gasa mishma achila, it wouldn't even be called an achila. So therefore, you don't need a special pasuk to tell you that there's a mitzvah to eat it, not an achila gasa, because the word achila alone tells you that it cannot be an achila gasa. Because if someone eats achila gasa on Yom Kippur, which means right after Yom Kippur he ate and he was so full, and then shkia happened, and then he adds more food, that's not even a chiyuv of Yom Kippur because it's not called eating. Ella, you have to say is rotza matzah eicheles, rotza chametz eicheles. Any regular wheat before he was makdashit, he was able to eat it sai. If it was chametz sai, it was matzah. And now he could only eat it if it's matzah. And maybe that's what the Mishnah means, or the Brayso means according to Abba Shol. Correct? Well, you can't say that. Because again, we know from other places that it has to be matzah and it can't be chametz. So we see clearly from that pasuk that the shiur mincha cannot be made into chametz. So once again, what extra are we learning according to Abba Shol? Even the chelik, not only what you put on the mizbeach cannot be chametz, but even the shiurim, the shirayim of the mincha, they're not allowed to prepare in such a way where it will become chametz. Ella, the only way we'll be able to explain even a heter of eating, even an Israel of eating, is ella rotza matzah oichla, rotza cholot oichla. Before it was kachim, you could eat it matzah, or you can eat it by plunging it into water and boiling it, like how they prepare a bagel. Kamash Milan, that you can't do it cholot, you can only eat it matzah. Frankly, more, I don't understand. Hi cholot, hi chidami. What is this cholot? If it's not chametz, well, then hamatzi. Then we're not excluding it from the achilas hamincha either. If it's not chametz, why can't you plunge it into water? The Eloi matzahi, and if it's not matzah, if it's chametz, well, the matzah is amarechman. So, weiter, what's this extra lima that we're learning? Limits. Let's say chalat is considered matzah. So I wouldn't know from anywhere else in the pasuk that that's not a preferred way of eating. But the reason why the Torah repeats it again is to tell you that you should not eat it cholot. So really, chalut technically would be considered, chalut would technically be considered matzah. Nevertheless, the Torah is telling you you shouldn't eat it chalut. Zok Gemara. So you're saying chalut matzah. So you're saying chalut is matzah. So if you're saying chalut is matzah, lamai nafkamina, that chalut is not considered chametz. Chalut matzah the kamrina on lamai hilchasa. Lagabi, what halacha is it important for me to know that chalut is considered matzah? I'm going to tell you, sha'adam yoytza ba yidei chavasa b'pesach. You could be yoytza the mitzvah of matzah even though it was boiled. Afal pi the chalta meikara, even though you first plunge the dough into boiling hot water, you'd still be able to use it for matzah, even the hadar afya betaner, since you bake it in the oven after you did chaluta, lechem ayni karina bay, it would still be called lechem ayni, and therefore adam yoytze ba yidei chavasa pesach. But you have psukim to tell you that that's not the right way to eat. That's not the right way to eat the shiore hamincha. You're allowed to have matzah that was boiled first and then baked, but it has to be baked. Okay. And the chiddush by Kachim is that when it says matzah, it means matzah, not challah. So even though it's not chametz, but it's not really matzah either, and that's why Abu Shol would learn from the extra matzah sheyachal b'makom kodesh, matzah sheyachal b'makom kodesh. We learned that you shouldn't eat it challah. Okay, we'll stop here.